Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about the poetry of Sarain Stump, which I'm reading out of Native Poetry in Canada. So Stump is a really interesting poet who combined poetry with traditionally inspired artwork. So he himself was Cree, Shoshone, and Salish, but he took a particular interest in the sort of desert paintings and cave paintings of the American Southwestern tribes, like the Pueblo, the Comanche, the Apache, etc., etc. And so his artistic style, you can see a couple of drawings here, are very much in this, very much influenced by this sort of Southwestern tradition, along with other Native American First Nations and Inuit and Métis styles, particularly like South American Indigenous paintings, like the Nazca paintings and things like this. Like this one in particular, to me, very much has a sort of Nazca lines type look to it, even though the figures themselves are filled in, which is not characteristic of the Nazca lines. But and so he has this multimedia or multimodal approach to artistic creation. Also very, very sad. He died quite young. He drowned. He was born in 1945 and died in 1974. He drowned at the age of 29. And so, I mean, who knows what kind of amazing poetry we could have had from Sarain Stump if he had not died so young. But his poetry, again, draws on these traditional styles, but it's also, there's an element of surrealism in some of them. There's an element of angst, anger, which is not uncharacteristic of Indigenous poets in the colonial and settler colonial and capitalist systems. So, I mean, one that I'm going to read you is "It's with terror sometimes," and you get this somewhat sort of surrealist element, but also this angst, and that's the one that's accompanied by this drawing of these two sort of horned figures with maybe the sun and a snake included here. So this is "It's with terror sometimes." It's with terror sometimes that I hear them calling me, but it's the light skip of a cougar detaching me from the ground to leave me alone with my crazy power till I reach the sun makers and find myself again in a new place. So again, maybe surrealist is not quite the right word. Mystical maybe is a better term for it, but there is definitely this element of the mythic, the supernatural, that is connected in this poem to empowerment, to the experience of newness or novelty, and that experience is connected to this idea of overcoming. Particularly this opening bit, right? It's with terror sometimes that I hear them calling me. Now, we don't know who them is in this poem. We can read any number of potential foes into this pronoun, This could be settler colonialists. This could be capitalists. This could be white people. This could be poverty. This could be addiction. This could be any number of things, whether human antagonists or non-human social forces, whatever it is. But there's clearly some version of oppression, suffering, etc. That is the antagonist of the poem, and that the poet persona escapes through the light skip of a cougar detaching me from the ground, through their crazy power, and through reaching the sunmakers, right? This sort of mystical escape, surrealist imagery used to sort of explore escaping from this source of terror. In a poem like "And There Is My People Sleeping," we definitely get more of a sense of Stump's commitment to Indigenous issues. And there is my people sleeping. And there is my people sleeping since a long time, but aren't just dreams the old cars without engine, parking in front of the house, or angry words ordering peace of mind, or who steals from you for your good and doesn't want to remember what he owes you. Sometimes I'd like to fall asleep too, close my eyes on everything, but I can't. And so, I mean, the reference to my people for somebody who, again, is Cree, Shoshone, and Salish descended. I mean, this is a pretty pan-Indian background. Yeah, I mean, Stump sort of comes of age during the period of the 1960s, 70s, in which the Indigenous rights movement emerged, the Red Power movement emerged, etc., etc. And you had a merging of tribal identities, national identities, band identities into this concept of pan-Indianism, in which Indigenous peoples started to sort of say, Indigenous activists, I should say, started to sort of say, we can take advantage of this political identity that has been imposed on us by settler colonialism as Indians, as Indigenous people, and we can identify collective values and ways of looking at the world and use that collective as a source of power rather than being isolated as the Cree or the Shoshone or the Salish or the Haudenosaunee, the Mohawk, the Seneca, whatever it is. So rather than being isolated in these ways, you come together. And so when Stump writes about my people in a poem written in 1970, it's not unreasonable to read that as a reference to Indigenous Americans. And when he talks about old cars without engine parking in front of the house, this is probably a reference to the poverty that's pervasive in Native American, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. Broken down, rusted out cars are sort of ubiquitous symbol of poverty, including not just in Indigenous communities, but you think about every movie you've ever seen where you go to a poor rural area, there's always a rusted out car up on cinder blocks and whatever it is. We think about this line, or who steals from you for your good and doesn't want to remember what he owes you. this is pretty easy to read as a critique of settler colonialism, which for centuries has displaced Indigenous people from their traditional territories in the United States and Canada, and instead confined them to increasingly smaller reserves or detached them entirely from their traditional lands, cultures, practices, etc., into urban areas. So another one that I'm gonna read you is, I was mixing stars and sand. And I think this is another one that's very critical of settler colonialism and sort of the difficulties of cross-cultural communication with someone who is dedicated to not understanding your cultural practices, right? As many settler colonial North Americans, white North Americans in particular, but settler colonial North Americans across the board have been invested in not genuinely understanding Native American, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis cultures, because understanding them and seeing them as legitimate undermines the settler colonial project. And so I think this poem, I was mixing stars and sand, is very much taking on that sort of concern. Sorry. I was mixing stars and sand in front of him, but he couldn't understand. I was keeping the lightning of the thunder in my purse just in front of him, but he couldn't understand. Sorry. And I had been killed 1,000 times right at his feet, but he hadn't understood. And so again, this sort of idea of engaging with the natural world, engaging with natural elements, stars, sand, lightning, thunder, etc., etc. Sorry. This is a very recurring type of imagery in Native American, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis culture, in their poetry, in their storytelling, in their artwork, etc., etc. The natural world and natural elements are extraordinarily important, and they are treated with a great deal of respect, in part because these are cultures built out often. I don't want to overgeneralize here, but generally speaking, these are cultures that place a high degree of priority on sustainable existence within the world. Settler colonialism and capitalism, by contrast, is proprietary and exploitative. The way that settler colonialists and capitalists, broadly speaking, view the land, resources. When I say resources, I mean like mineral resources, natural resources, fossil fuels, etc. Even our terminology for them, mineral resources, natural resources, fossil fuels, all tells us these exist to be used. They exist to be exploited for human purposes, right? A resource, pretty much by definition, exists to be used. If coal, for instance, were not useful, if we did not use it or could not use it or refused to use it or whatever it was, we wouldn't see it as a resource. We might call it a natural phenomenon or something like that, but resource implies this is to be used, that its purpose is to be consumed. And we have a proprietary attitude toward these things. That is, we see them as something to be owned and to be consumed. And so this this sort of use of natural resources, natural phenomenon, not necessarily for proprietary or profit-driven or exploitative or consumptive reasons, is incomprehensible to the he of the poem, the person for whom the poet persona is performing these things. And these last three lines, "And I had been killed 1,000 times right at his feet, but he hadn't understood," really evokes the incredibly violent history of settler colonialism in which Indigenous people have recurringly been subjected to violence, to brutality, to cultural genocide, etc., etc., and settler colonialists have a vested interest in not seeing that as having occurred and as being an ongoing project within settler colonial societies like Canada and the United States.